Hi, this is my questions and answers video, a continuation of my thank you for 500 subscribers video that I uploaded last week. If you haven't seen that one, I'm going to put a link in the description below. Now, let's begin. The first question comes from Zionist Cunt with wire-like pubs. Zionist asks, what computer RPGs do you consider deep enough to be side by side with the depth of a tabletop RPG? I don't think there are any computer RPGs that reach the level of depth of a tabletop RPG, but mostly because I think that the depth of tabletop RPGs is very much related to the freedom of what you can do within a tabletop RPG. Because in tabletop RPGs you can adapt the system and the rules, the mechanics, everything to different situations that could come up because of players' unusual actions. But in a computer RPG you need the system to be programmed with the ability to match those situations, to accommodate those different actions and anything that can modify the game world or actions within it. Because, for example, in Baldur's Gate is an awesome computer RPG, but in that game you cannot swim or you cannot climb. Maybe there are mods for that, I'm not too sure, but with the game as it was produced to be played as, you cannot swim and you cannot climb and do many things that you could do in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So that feels quite limited and it takes away from the depth of what the AD&D system allows you to do in its tabletop version. However, I do think that some computer RPGs try to approach this level of depth and emulation in a somewhat realistic way, but they still feel quite limited. But those would be those old school RPGs such as Might and Magic, Wasteland, and it's no surprise because those RPGs were directly modeled on the concept of Dungeons and Dragons and Metamorphosis Alpha and many other RPGs. So you expect to see some of those iconic elements from RPGs in those computer RPGs. Because, for example, in many of those games, you could die from starvation, thirst, you could suffer sickness from radiation, and sometimes you really need to take some very realistic measures to avoid dying in such ways. You can also die from old age. And I also think that they do their best within their limits to give you many options that you will expect to see in a tabletop RPG. Like, for example, in Baldur's Gate, I do not know why they didn't include like a very simple option, as I was telling you, to climb up walls or swim in lakes and rivers. Because in Might and Magic, even though the graphics are quite rudimentary or primitive, to put it in a way, they still had these different areas that, oh, do you want to climb up that tree? And you would type like yes, and depending on your character's skill, perhaps you fall down that tree and you hurt yourself, or maybe you find something quite valuable up that tree. And there were also like tunnels and magic fountains, many things. I think that appeared in Wizardry, I'm not too sure. Many unexpected things that you would find in tabletop RPGs that more modern role-playing games do not have, because they are a bit more focused on combat, on tactical battles. So even though I do not think there are still computer games that approach the level of depth and freedom of a tabletop RPG, in fact I don't think that there will ever be a computer game that matches our tabletop RPGs in that regard. I still think that old school RPGs and some modern games that try to bring back those old school sensibilities, because, for example, Sword of the Stars, The Pit, also has a mechanic where you could die from starvation, and you can also search and craft and all of that. There are modern games that also contain those elements. I still think that it is within those old school sensibilities that I feel that those computer RPGs approach tabletop RPGs in a somewhat limited way. Now, Zionist's other question is, What movies, books, or fictional worlds in general that have not been adapted into an RPG would you like to see adapted? Hmm, maybe some niche settings such as Turok, like Turok the Dinosaur Hunter. And I'm talking about the old comic book universe because I think Turok has gone through some radical changes throughout the years. But the main concept of having this sort of like lost world type of area with that basically represents like the drain of all the universe. So you can find many strange things like dinosaurs, aliens, zombies, all of that in a single place. That's quite interesting, and maybe you could create a player character from different Native American tribes because Turok is kind of like an Native American, and I think it could work. Although I do think that there are already some universal systems such as Savage Worlds that could handle that quite well. Some other universes or fictional worlds would be Vampire Hunter D. I'm a huge fan of Vampire Hunter D. If you haven't seen my video of Vampire Hunter D, I'm going to put a link in the description below because it's a world of Wild West, gothic horror, steampunk. There are so many elements again, but handled in a very dark but at the same time very cool and awesome way. So that would be a very interesting RPG in my opinion, especially because maybe you had like character classes represented by hunters like Werewolf Hunter, Vampire Hunter, Mutant Hunter, etc. with different abilities, skills, specializations. But I also think that maybe using Ova or Valor or again Savage Worlds, it could be possible to represent Vampire Hunter D quite well, especially with the Savage Worlds Horror Companion. Demon Souls or Dark Souls or Bloodbound will also be quite interesting to represent in tabletop RPGs, in my opinion. It's basically dark fantasy, somewhat nightmarish at times, and you could also create characters with many different stats and abilities because those are action role-playing games. So you basically have a lot of things already made or begging to be brought into the tabletop RPG environment. In fact, I think that later on this year, the Dark Souls board game is going to come out. It's a cooperative game, so I think it would be a great idea to bring either a Demon Souls, Dark Souls, or Bloodbound RPG into existence. That is in a tabletop RPG kind of way. Then we have a question from 34 Parker, and he says, you've reviewed a lot of games, so which ones do you actually play regularly? For instance, I backed Symbaroum on Kickstarter but can't find anyone who wants to play it, so I'll likely be joining a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition group. It's not that I think one is better than the other, it's just that 5th edition is likely the game to get played. What are yours? And one cool thing is that DMT Tabletop Gaming referred 34 Parker to a group where they actually play Symbaroum games. So I hope that you found a Symbaroum game, 34 Parker. And that's one of the difficult things of RPGs. Sometimes you want to play a game, but you do not have players that are interested in playing that particular game. Especially if you want to play face to face, because you can always play online. But face to face, you really need to live close by to someone who wants to play those games. My regular games currently, because this changes with as the months go by, would be Hackmaster and Mutant Chronicles. Those are the ones that have been somewhat steady, that I have a proper campaign going. Hackmaster has been a bit slower because there's a bit more bookkeeping when the characters level up, but Mutant Chronicles is a bit more, it's played more regularly. And on the solo side of things, Deluxe Dungeons and Trolls, I always play that. So yeah, it depends on the players, but right now Hackmaster and Mutant Chronicles. Then we have a question from Marco from Multiverso Distópico. He asks, have you ever used props for your games? Yes, I'm not like that much of a prop guy, but when it's possible, I use props. I try not to use too many props because if you use too many, the table starts to look like a garage sale of sorts with all sorts of weird objects, and so I try to keep it at a minimum, maybe at most two, perhaps even three small objects. And Marco says, there are several games which always inspire me to create some sort of props, like mixing a radio-free death broadcast for an Orpheus game, but I never get to actually make them for many reasons. What sort of games do you think get the most from using props? Thank you for the great content and keep up the good work. Thanks, Marco. I'll try to keep it up. Well, on the music side of things, I always use music in my role-playing games. I don't match tracks to particular encounters. I just put a soundtrack that matches the overall theme of the game. But that I always use music. And I never create specific props. I always use something that has been already created, sometimes by me, because, for example, I'm working in this. I still need to finish a lot of things and repaint some things, but this is a sort of like a bunker for the Battle for Zycanthus box set. I'm going to put a link in the description below to the review of that war game. And this could, for example, be used like a technological device of sorts, like here, take this explosive or whatever, and it could serve for certain encounters in sci-fi games. So I usually use what I already have at hand. In the past, for example, I've used the broken leg of a chair that it still looks it looked quite fancy, and I used it as sort of like a very powerful magic wand. So it depends, but I never create props. I always use what I already have at hand. And I think that the games that benefit most from props are those on the theater of the mind side of things, such as anything from the White Wolf games, World of Darkness and such, because people sometimes really like to grab things and hold things and touch things, and when you have props, they always have like a thing to be holding, and they really like having things around. But I recommend that if you use props, you use something that is not too distracting, otherwise they could not listen to descriptions and such. Or if you're going to use a very nice looking object, give your players a few minutes to admire it and get fascinated with it, because otherwise when you are describing the encounters and enemies and such, they could get too distracted. But yeah, I don't use props all the time. In fact, I think that I would use them 2 out of 3 times. No, sorry, that's two out of 6 times. So the only thing that I really use a lot is music. And then Paul A asks, my question is, what fictional universe would you consider has been the best adapted into tabletop gaming? Things like atmosphere and game feel, for example, in accordance to the source material. Probably Call of Cthulhu, because the entire rule set allows you to play as those very fragile of mind, fragile of body investigators that you normally see in Lovecraft's stories. So I think that's the best in a sense of representing a fictional environment in RPG rules. And the theme as well, everything makes sense within the mythos of Lovecraft. But besides that, I think the current Conan role-playing game, Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of, even though I played a couple of one-shots, I think that the 2D20 system really helps to bring out that savagery and high fantasy aspect within a sword and sorcery, high adventure aspect in a sword and sorcery world of Conan. So those would be the 2 games. Maybe it also has to do because I'm a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, but Call of Cthulhu and Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of are probably the ones that I consider that they represent better that fictional world that they are representing or converting to tabletop RPG rules. Then we have a question from Jen Niflheim, and he asks, How often do you play RPGs and which ones? Or do you just collect them? And how much money do you spend each year for RPGs? If I'm lucky, and this is counting one-shot sessions that I sometimes play to see how a particular system works. Sometimes I don't even finish an adventure, I play a few encounters. It would be like, if I'm lucky, 5 or 6 times per month, but including solo games. If I were to count just like multiplayer games that I regularly play from Hackmaster and Mutant Chronicles, if I'm lucky, like twice per month, perhaps once per month. And the sessions vary. Sometimes they're just 2 hour sessions, or sometimes, if I'm lucky, I get to play with 6 hours, but it depends on my players as well, and if they're too busy, etc. And on the side of collecting RPGs, I think this is a very good point, because I've noticed that a lot of players sometimes buy different systems and modules and adventures and splat books, and sometimes they never get to use them as much as they wanted to, but so they take elements from those RPGs and modules and use them in some other RPGs they regularly play. So I like that aspect of the collectability of RPGs, that sometimes you take pieces from a certain game and use them in another game, rules that you like, setting elements, and other times it just serve like inspiration. And on the side of how much money do I spend on RPGs, I've never really thought about that. Probably around $200 per year, 200, perhaps 300 if there's like a very nice looking hardcover book. Because I'm always on the lookout for Bundle of Holding and Humble Bundle and Drive-Thru RPG sales, and sales in Amazon, Noble Knight Games, where you can get a lot of books for a decently cheap price. And so, yeah, probably around 200, 300. And then I have a question from ReaperX. By the way, ReaperX has a very cool old school blog. I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can check it out. And he asks, awesome milestone. This is still my favorite RPG video blog. Thanks, ReaperX. My question for you is, what was the most challenging game that you have ever personally played, either from the GMing or the playing side? Probably a Ravenloft game when I was like 15 years old, more or less, on the game master side of things, because I was running that Ravenloft game, but I had a couple of players that were they didn't have too much of a good attention span. That is, they had like this jumpy mind or brain, and they had really a very hard time focusing on things. And that's very difficult in a Ravenloft game, because Ravenloft depends quite a bit on atmosphere. And remember, this is old school Ravenloft. So to create that Hammer horror film type of vibe, with sometimes combined with weird horror, it's you really have to capture your players' attention. So I had to do my best at keeping things like moody and killing the non-player characters that were most attached to the player characters in key moments, so that they felt that sense of dread and vulnerability. And there were also a lot of enemies with level drain abilities back then, so that was that also helps. Player characters always hate enemies that drain their precious experience levels, so that was quite challenging. And then Zone Gamma asks, how many RPG books do you have? Probably about 120. That's physical books. For how long have you been buying books? Probably like for 20 years, more or less. And then how and where do you store them? Pretty much everywhere. I'm somewhat disorganized. I have them, some of them in drawers, in bookcases, in shelves, but they're always mixed with other things. So you're going to see books of philosophy, and then books of RPGs, and you're going to see RPG books, sometimes inside boxes of board games. I'm somewhat disorganized like that. And he asks, can you show us your bookcase? Well, not really, because don't have like a special RPG bookcase. My RPGs are all over the place, so so sorry about that. And then we have a question from God Emperor Leto II. Congratulations, and look at that, you are now at 501 subscribers and currently at 505 last time I checked. I hope it keeps going up. I enjoy your channel very much. Thank you. You are well read, articulate, and have a wealth of knowledge on RPGs. Thanks, I hope I improve in all of that. My question, the following. You review a ton of games. Which are your favorite to play and why? A difficult question because I like them all quite a bit. Perhaps based on emotional attachment and the time that I've played with them in the past. That is, currently I am not playing them, but as I was telling you, they kind of like they're worth a lot to me emotionally, and because I play them quite a bit, it will have to be, well, Hackmaster, probably the most awesome classic fantasy simulation that I have seen. That is very realistic. You have rules for everything that you can think of, and Hackmaster, definitely, that's one of my favorites. One other favorite RPG would be Pathfinder, basically because I've played it quite a bit, and there's just so much material for it out there, and you can modify it in a zillion ways. Another role-playing game of my favorites would be The Mutant Epoch, because you can create all sorts of weird cyborgs and mutants and bioreplicas, and you never know what you're going to end up with every time you play a game and create characters. But there are many other RPGs that I wish I could play a bit more, and they will probably, maybe if a few months go by and you ask me again, I will have some other favorite RPGs. So this list is constantly changing, but definitely Hackmaster, probably my current favorite RPG. And then Green Owl 105 asks, congratulations on 500 subscribers. What are your top 10 solo games? I'm going to cheat a bit on this question because there aren't many tabletop RPGs that can be played solo or exclusively designed to be played as solo games. I think that if you look hard enough, you would probably find 15 or even 20 solo RPGs out there, but a lot of them are pretty bad. I can think of probably 4 that I wouldn't recommend to anyone. So I'm going to mix some other types of games with this list. In first place would be Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls, because it's very easy to play, very easy to run. So as a solo experience, sometimes if you are waiting for something else, or you do not have too much time, you can play a quick encounter with it and keep track of, because you have different adventures. They are all quite high on the replayability aspect. So Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls, definitely. Number 2 would be Scarlet Heroes, because you can create your own adventures, and the only reason why Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls is above that is because Scarlet Heroes takes a bit more time to play as you flesh out the wilderness area that you are exploring, or the dungeons and the cities. In that aspect, you could say Scarlet Heroes feels more complete than Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls, because you do not need adventures. You can create your own adventure on the fly. But Scarlet Heroes definitely second place. The Mutant Epoch would be third place, because you have this awesome adventures that you can play as a solo experience, but they're also quite easy to play as a cooperative experience. But if you say to play Mutant Epoch, I would recommend that you only create like 6 characters using the most powerful character generation method, which is I think it was the shotgun method with some other thing combined, because sometimes it could feel a bit overwhelming to play with solo with 12 player characters that have different powers and abilities. And then on fourth place would be Advanced Hero Quest. I really need to do a review of this, which would be the board game that got me started into tabletop RPGs. I really need to review that. It's an awesome dungeon crawler. I even consider that it surpasses the modern Dungeons and Dragons board games, Wrath of Ashardalon, Legend of Dritz, because Mm, Advanced Hero Quest has so many things that it has that level of exploration of a true dungeon crawl that you find mysterious like gates and bridges and fountains and magic circles all randomly and bookcases if I'm not mistaken. And in those other games, well, I'll talk about those in a few minutes. And then in fifth place would be Mage Knight, probably the best board game that I own. I also want to review that one, but I want to review it with all of the expansions that have come out. And the recent expansion for Mage Knight, it had some trouble with, they used different materials and sizes, and this game relies quite a bit on randomness, so it's kind of like a flawed expansion. I'm waiting to get the reprint soon and try it out. But Mage Knight, it's basically RPG, the board game. You have this character and you move across the map and you can build an army if you want to, and you can attack cities, or you can go into dungeons and ruins. You can collect magical crystals. You can win in so many different ways, accumulating points in different ways. An awesome game. And sixth place would be World of Warcraft, the board game. Now this is not a solo board game, but I modified it to be played as a solo experience, and I like it quite a bit. I am going to put a link in the description below of the review for World of Warcraft, the board game. And then on 7th place would be Legend of Drizzt. This is one of the Dungeons and Dragons board games that uses the Dungeons and Dragons adventure system. It's a very simple system, but it's fun for what it offers. In fact, 34 Parker recommended that I played those board games. But I have been playing them for a few years, and I agree that they are fun. However, they are quite lacking in that sense of exploration. It always feels like somebody is kind of like pushing you onward, like with a cattle prod or hot iron, because if you do not move constantly, you're constantly getting attacked by traps and enemies, and you never feel that sense of, oh, moving carefully through the dungeon, and you open the door, what's there? An empty room, but there seems to be like a strange object in the middle of that room, and all of that you get with Advanced Hero Quest, and not with these Dungeons and Dragons board games. But still, I like Legend of Drizzt, the easiest of Dungeons and Dragons board games. I haven't played board games. I haven't played the Temple of Elemental Evil, so I can't give you an opinion on that. But Legend of Drizzt is probably the easiest game, and I really like Drizzt Do'Urden, so that's on my 7th place on this list. And then I like Wrath of Ashardalon because it has that campaign aspect to it, and I like Castle Ravenloft as the 9th place because, well, it's quite difficult, but the rules do not feel like they were really fleshed out as the first Dungeons and Dragons modern board game. It felt a bit rushed at times even. And then Destiny Quest would be the 10th place. It's a series of game books. I've only played the second one, but it was a pretty cool experience, although it's a bit more on the MMORPG side of things, in my opinion. And then Alphonse Pride asks, why didn't you ever make an official review of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? Would you avoid saying something controversial on a Dungeons & Dragons review? I ask because I have problems with the system and I never got to hear someone point the things that frustrate me. Well, I never got Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition because it felt a bit too flat for me, or too average. I played with the PDF that you could download for free from the Wizards of the Coast website, and I watched the different reviews and watched different sessions. Read some reviews as well, and it felt like something that if I wanted to play that type of simple experience, I already have the former editions of Dungeons and Dragons and many pseudo clones and retro clones, so I didn't see the point on getting Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and never got into that hype. So yeah, that's the reason, and this became more evident to me when I've reviewed some Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition supplements by Total Party Kills, and I like them because they made Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition feel a bit more like Pathfinder. So as I was telling you, it really felt too flat, or felt flat for me, too average. And as to the would I avoid saying something controversial on a Dungeons and Dragons review? Well, not if I see something controversial, I point it out in my reviews. I'm going to put a few links in the description below to some of what I would consider my most controversial reviews. That is, that I approached these games and supplements that felt a bit controversial. As to controversial things that I could say about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, maybe that they focused too much on simplifying the system, and they gave it a specific aesthetic style or look, just to see if they could sell more things. Instead of focusing on creating Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, I felt like they said, let's create a game that everybody wants to buy, so they focus too much more on the sales side of things. In fact, I unofficially consider 13th Age to be Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So there's that. I'm also going to put a link in the description below to Noah Antwiler's funny video review of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Even though it's a comedy review, there are some things that I agree with him. And then I have a question from Ivan Mike, 1968. And he says, I may have missed it in the past. How did you get into role-playing gaming? Well, I talked about my beginnings as a role player in my Introduction to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons box set review. I'm going to put a link in the description below. My anecdote about my start into RPGs ends at around the 5-minute mark in that video. And then Ivan asks, what prompted you to start doing video reviews of games, and at what point did you realize it had become your thing? Maybe when in the past I was always looking for reviews of different RPGs and supplements and such, but I saw many written reviews, but sometimes I felt like those written reviews didn't really communicate many things, many of the cool things and bad things about those role-playing games, because I like to see people communicating through body language, through their expressions and their voice. It's quite noticeable when somebody likes the game, like I love it and all of that. So you get to experience that sense of enthusiasm, and I thought that there weren't too many RPG video reviews out there. So I decided to give it a shot, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I think that the thing that I enjoy most about RPG reviews is that people get to purchase the RPGs that they enjoyed based on what I recommend. And I also like it when, for example, they avoid things that aren't necessary for them, because I've done positive reviews about some games, and I get comments that, oh, that game sounds really cool, but because of the things that you described, it's not the game for me. So I really like when my reviews are useful for that. And then Ivan says, I notice we share a similar love of games that involve a certain amount of horror or weird situations. What do you think made you gravitate towards those kinds of games and products? I've always liked horror ever since I was little. I feel like horror in general, in all sorts of fiction, is a bit like I wouldn't say teacher, but let's say like a vehicle or medium to understand the unexpected things in life. I also think that horror, when you take it seriously, it makes you a bit more brave, and it helps you handling different horrifying situations in real life. So horror for me, it's a very powerful thing that has been with me ever since I was little, and throughout my life. I've understood more and more about horror in horror books, horror video games, horror movies, and in horror games, I love how all that sense of mystery and nightmarish wonder can be played through the rules of RPGs, and that sense of horror colors different settings. So it's basically just like love at first sight when it comes to horror in my case. And of course I'm going to try to represent that horror through RPGs when I play them, when I read them, when I experiment them. Another question from Ivan is, what things do you look for in a game? What things? I look for fun and consistency more than anything. The rules have to represent whatever story or theme the game tries to represent. That is, there has to be some sense or connection between rules and the theme and the story. And what kind of criteria do you use when reviewing them for yourself? That the mechanics cover a lot of situations, but if they are handled more on a rules light kind of way, that they are easy enough to modify based on the situation at hand. And also that the setting makes sense, that there is consistency. If the core rulebook presents the setting in a way at the beginning and that by the end of it they represent some setting elements that are basically contradictions of what has already been established, then I do not like that. Or when, again, the setting is twisted in other supplements, I also tend to avoid games like that. And next question is from Ivan. What are make or break things for you when it comes to deciding whether or not to play a game or give it a thumbs up? Well, the things that make a game for me, as I was telling you, consistency in both the rules and then the setting, and that the game is fun, that I'm doing something else and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to finish this so that I can play this game. I need to get that urge to play the game. Or even, for example, if I don't have players for that game, I'm already thinking, oh, I wish I had players to play that game. Or I wish my players would like to play that game, and I get that sense of urgency of I want to play it. And games that are broken to me, on the rules side of things, because I usually tend to fix things or modify rules at times, it will have to be a pretty broken down rules system for me to consider it completely broken, like, oh, this system simply does not work. And on the side of the setting things, I consider it a broken setting if the setting is contaminated by ulterior motives of the author. Because, for example, let's say you create a setting where bananas and oranges are the only things in existence, and they are intelligent and they fight wars and such. And we're like, well, you have the right to design. Well, you have the freedom to design anything that you like. But if they start saying something like, as you well know, bananas and oranges are the best things in the world and they rule everything, and you have to be like a banana and an orange, or if you're not, you suck. And if they try to convince someone of a particular thing in a setting, I think I do not like that kind of thing, because it feels kind of like the author is telling you what to think. And it's better for you to make your own mind on anything that has been presented in a setting, even though it could be quite controversial. Because, for example, the Carcosa setting for Lamentations of the Flame Princess was highly criticized because it presents some very disturbing things. But it never goes out of its way telling you like, oh, you see those attitudes or things in this setting, you need to behave like that in real life or as such. So I think Carcosa and similar systems or settings within RPGs are very much in their right to represent that. But when they try to convince you otherwise, then I do consider that RPG or setting to be broken. Because many RPGs come with the setting included. That's why I approached that topic. And those are all of the questions. Well, thank you very much for asking all of this. These questions were quite interesting and difficult for me because I had to think quite a bit. Overall, thank you for making this video worth watching because of your awesome questions. Thanks for watching, and I hope I'll see you soon. Next week I'm going to bring out some interesting reviews, well, within the next couple of weeks. One related to Advanced Fighting Fantasy 2nd edition, and one very interesting Pathfinder book. So I hope you will see those reviews. See you later.